What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, I'm talking about some of the top mistakes I'm seeing SketchUp users making right now and how to fix them. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. Okay, so I do get a lot of these questions from course members inside of my courses. And so if you do need some additional SketchUp help, my course, the SketchUp Essentials course, is currently on sale through like Saturday night as a part of our Valentine's Day sale. But I wanted to talk about some of these issues that people run into. And so probably the biggest issue that new users have when they're working in SketchUp is they don't use the inferencing. And so using the inferencing is very important for multiple different reasons. So first is it allows you to keep all of your angles at a 90 degree. So if you just come in here and you just kind of start drawing and you're not paying attention to the inferencing, you could absolutely come in here and draw a 20-foot line and then another 20-foot line. But what can happen is you can start getting kind of off if you're not paying attention to the inferencing, right? If you're getting your mouse kind of close and just kind of eyeballing this, then what's going to happen is you're going to start running into issues where your walls and everything are not straight. Right? You can see how these are off by a little bit. And where that starts becoming a problem is you obviously want to model things accurately, right? These walls are going to be at a 90-degree angle, so you need to be modeling at 90 degrees. But what happens is when you start bringing in things like this chair right here, notice how the inferencing along the red axis doesn't actually match this line. And so what happens is you start having to like use the line for inferencing. And then whenever you're always going to be fighting the inferencing engine in here because it's trying to move this along the red axis, but this line is drawn off the axis. Where this can get really problematic is you might have an issue like this one. So we've got one line in here that isn't flat. And so what happens is it makes it very, very difficult for you to actually close in this shape, right? Because what you start doing is you start doing like little bits at a time in order to try to figure out like where is my problem area in here. So you have to kind of like start dialing this in and notice how like nothing on this line is aligned, and it's all because this line right here, instead of being drawn along the red axis, was drawn just a little bit up, right? And to solve it, you would just have an edge over here like this one, and then you've got faces in here. So drawing off axis is a problem. And so the way that we solve that is we use inferencing. And so what inferencing is SketchUp's engine telling you, okay, I think that you want to go this direction. It's giving you kind of a suggestion. And so the way that works is if you activate a tool like the line tool right here, first off, if you just move your mouse in this direction, you can see that this is kind of turning green, and drawing this right on the axes makes it a little bit hard to see. But notice how if I draw on the green axis, this is going to turn green like this. Now, if you have trouble with this, one of the things you can do is with a tool active like the line tool, if you tap the left, right, or up arrow keys, this will actually lock your lines to a direction. So in this situation, I can single click and then tap that left arrow key to lock my mouse to this direction. Now I know that I'm drawing along that inference right there. So if I type in a value of like 20 feet or something like that, I know that I'm able to use this. So I can do the same thing and tap the right arrow key here in order to do that. So that's extremely valuable because it allows you to know that you're drawing along the axes. Now, another thing that you can do is you can also use inferencing or inference locking using the shift key. And so let's say, for example, that I wanted to draw a line that was exactly the same length as this line over here, like this. I could either mouse over this edge, move my mouse back until this turns red, which is one way to do it, or you can also hold the shift key right here. So when you move your mouse in the red direction, you can hold the shift key in order to lock that inference. And when you do that, you can actually inference to things that are in your model right here. So again, I can know that I'm drawing along the red axis right here by doing that. But whether you use the keys whether you hold shift or whether you use some kind of inferencing off of an edge, you need to make sure that you're using inferencing to draw everything on the same plane, or else you're going to have problems. Okay, so issue number 2, and actually a lot of problems seem to stem from this with new users, is not grouping geometry and just leaving everything as raw geometry. All right, so I've got this window that I've placed in this wall right here, and you can see how nothing is grouped. Now that can get problematic because if I have to come in here and make adjustments to the window or something like that, and I start moving things around, you have this like sticky mess in here, right? It can really mess up your geometry. Plus you can like accidentally pick up some parts and pieces in your model, like say that I accidentally picked up this edge right here. You can start running into problems really quickly if you don't group geometry. And so my recommendation is to keep things grouped. So for example, you want to keep your walls grouped separate from your windows. That way, you can toggle your windows on and off, and you can also put them on a separate layer in order to have different line weight and layout. But B, if I need to come in here and make an adjustment, it's as easy as me double clicking into this group and being able to push pull this wall right here. And so in this case, this is a Flex Tools Flex window, just so you can kind of see what's going on. But even if you had to model this window itself, keeping the geometry separate is going to be massively important. Now, stemming from that, the third thing that I see a lot of people trying to do is I see people trying to group all this geometry after they've extruded it to 3D, which is problematic. So let's say that we've got 2 copies of this right here, right? This is just going to be my walls. So one of them, I'm going to extrude to 3D like this before I group it. And so what happens is, as long as you don't have other raw geometry in the model, it's fine because you can just triple click on it and pick it up. But notice how this is 66 entities, and it's all in like the 3D space. So if you're having to like come in here and pick all of this up like this, it can be really problematic. What I recommend instead is group before you extrude. So what that means is before I extrude this to 3D, this is just 17 entities, and I can just pick it up by double clicking right here. And so before you extrude this to 3D, I would group it here and then double click into that group and then extrude it up, because now whatever you do in 3D is already inside of this group, and it's going to be group geometry, as opposed to you trying to come in here and pick up all of this after the fact when you might have a whole bunch of other elements in here. So grouping before you extrude can make your life a lot easier. And so I probably get questions on this more than anything else, or at least I have students in the course ask me more questions on this than anything else. And so it's really easy when you have raw geometry to cut a hole, right? Because with raw geometry, what you do is you just split it up. So I might do a 7-foot here, this, but you basically just draw a shape on a face. And in this case, I'll copy this over so that I have a full-on shape. So we've basically split this raw geometry of this face into 2 pieces right here. Well, what that means is that I can push pull this through to the back side of the wall and cut an opening, right? I get a ton of questions once we start grouping things because people struggle with the fact that you need to create your cutting object inside of the group on top of the raw geometry. So this doesn't work if you have a grouped wall and then you draw your window geometry over top of it like this, and then you try to push pull it through, right? And the reason for that is because the geometry of this wall is separate from the raw geometry in the model. And the reason for that is because it's in a group. So instead of drawing this window outside of the group, what you can do is you can double click into the group. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you can pick up the raw geometry of the face. If you can't pick up the raw geometry of the face by clicking on it, then this isn't going to work. So what you can do is you can just draw your window opening on here. And I'm actually going to click out of this group and get rid of all this extra geometry that I created. So notice how now this is all inside of the group, right? I drew the cutting hole in here on top of the raw geometry of the object, just like this. I'm in the group. Now I can push pull this across like this, and I can cut the opening. So it's massively important that when you're trying to cut an opening, you're actually inside of the group and you're able to pick up the raw geometry in here before you do anything else. Otherwise, your holes aren't going to cut. And so one thing that a lot of users struggle with, and one thing you can do to make this a little bit easier, is when you make an object a group and you double click into it, notice how there's a subtle change that happens in the 3D space like this. So when you double click into a group, you get a bounding box around the outside of the geometry, and it also slightly fades the other geometry in the model. But a lot of users either aren't looking for that, or the change isn't stark enough that they can see, okay, I'm inside of this group and I'm editing this piece of geometry. And so what you can do is there's two settings that you can toggle to make this easier. You can go up to your window, model info, and in the component section, there's an option you can set to fade the rest of your model, like this. And so notice how as I drag this to the right, it barely fades the rest of my model at all. So you can kind of see this over here. But if you toggle it to the left, it's going to really lighten up the rest of the model in here. So that's one thing that you can do. The other thing that you can do is you can also toggle this box right here. And when you toggle this box right here, what it's going to do is it's going to hide the rest of the model. So what that means is when you're editing a group, like this one, it literally hides everything else in the model like this. So what that can do is that can help you be a little bit more diligent in making sure that you're double clicking into groups before you create openings to cut right here. Because if you see anything other than just this object right here, you know that you're not far enough into the group and you need to go further. So I actually have this set to a keyboard shortcut. So I have this set to Shift H on my keyboard. And so what that means is I can toggle this on and off just by doing a Shift H on my keyboard, because I'll use this inside of a model when I'm working, and sometimes I'll just want it on for a second. So I'll just do a Shift H, do what I need to do, and then do a Shift H again in order to toggle this setting right here. And if you do want to set up that keyboard shortcut, you can do that by going to Window, Preferences, and going into Shortcuts right here. And in this case, we want Hide Rest of Model, and you can just add Shift H as a keyboard shortcut right here. So that's something that I find helpful if you're struggling with getting into your groups before you create that cutting geometry. Okay, so another thing that new users struggle with is whenever they get faces that look like this, right? If you look at the faces inside of this wall that I drew in on the back side over here, notice how they're this darker gray color. And so that darker gray color indicates something about the way the faces are facing. And so when you think about faces in SketchUp, right? So if I draw a rectangle right here, faces have a front side and a back side, right? So the front side is the side that's supposed to be facing the camera. This can become a real issue when you're dealing with rendering softwares because a lot of them won't show the back side of a face, only the front side of a face. And so what this means is the light color is showing you that this face is oriented in this direction right here. And this is showing you that the dark side of the face is oriented in the other direction. And so sometimes what'll happen is you'll get walls like this, and for whatever reason, the face orientation is facing the wrong way, right? So if I extrude this up, notice how I get these gray walls in here. Well, a lot of new users don't understand this. And so what happens is they're just like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to push-pull this. So they'll push-pull it up. And before you know it, you've got all this extra geometry in here. The faces are oriented the wrong way, and they don't understand why everything is showing up as gray. So to fix that, what you can do is you can just pick a gray face like this, and you need to be actually on the raw face. So notice I'm inside of the group right here. But if I right click on this, there's an option for reverse faces right here. And when I do that, and I can do that with these floor pieces as well, if I reverse these faces, that's going to change the face orientation. Well, now if I push-pull this up like this, notice how those faces are being oriented properly, where the white face is facing the camera right here. Now, one other thing that you can do with that, if you do push-pull an object up like this, for whatever reason, if you tap the Control key when this is active and put push-pull into create new face mode, that will also come in here and reverse the face orientation as you're extruding. So if you are extruding a wall like that and it's facing the wrong way for whatever reason, if you just tap the Control key with the push-pull tool active, then this will help fix that. Okay, and so another thing that I see a lot of users doing is they kind of blind select geometry. And so let's say I wanted to pick up some of these edges in here so that I could move the window opening like this. Well, what a lot of users will do is they'll just drag a box around it and then they'll start changing that geometry. Well, the problem is you're picking up all this extra geometry in here when you do this. And so what I like to do when I'm doing this is I have a keyboard shortcut set up, and this might be a native keyboard shortcut. I'm not 100% sure, but it toggles on X-ray mode. And so what X-ray mode does is it allows you to see through objects in SketchUp so you can see what you're selecting. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to pick up just these edges right here and make these windows another 6 inches wide. Like this. Notice how I'm stretching that geometry, which is always risky because you never know what you're picking up in the background. But if I toggle X-ray mode on like this, I can see exactly what I have selected in here. Like this. So that's actually extremely valuable for doing things like this. It's also extremely valuable for inferencing. And so let's say I have a desk like this one in here, and I want to move it so that it's aligned either with the middle of this object, or let's say we want to align it with the corner. So if we wanted to align this with the corner, that can get a little bit tricky because you would kind of have to get your camera around here in order to kind of like pick up that piece. Well, if you tap the X key and go into X-ray mode, notice how I can actually see those pieces even if I go down through the wall. So then what I could do is I could pick this up even through the wall right here, and I can move the object just like this. So when you toggle that X-ray mode on, what it does is it gives you the ability to see things through walls and inference to those things very easily, like this. And then another function that a lot of new users don't know about, which is extremely valuable, is they don't understand how to make copies. Say that I wanted to take this desk setup and align it not only with the middle of this room, but also the middle of this room right here. Well, a lot of new users think that they need to do a Control-C and a Control-V in order to make copies. So a copy-paste like this. I don't actually like doing that because notice how I have no control over the placement in here, and I would have to like replace and realign this object manually, which I don't really want to do. I mean, you can do it, but it's definitely time consuming. What I want to do instead is I want to use the move tool and I want to create a copy. We're going to select the object. We're going to tap M. We're going to click and move our mouse, and then we're going to tap the control key in order to go into copy mode like this. So you can create copies of things inside of a 3D space using the move tool in copy mode. Not only that, you can also set a base point that's off of your object right here. So if I activate the move tool, I don't have to click on this object. Like it's selected, but if I tap M and single click, I can set a base point on this back wall right here. So then I can tap the control key in order to create a copy, and I can align it with the midpoint of this room right here. And then I can just tap control again and do it again like this. Okay, and so another function that new users don't know about that is extremely valuable for moving things into and out of groups is a function called paste in place. And so the way that that works is, notice how right now I'm in my walls group. So if I toggle my Shift H right here, I am in my walls group, but I have 3 floor planes in here that I don't want. Right? Well, what I want to do is I want to take those and I want to pick up just the faces. So I'm going to do a shift click right here, and I need to remove them from this group. And so what I would do is I would just do an edit cut right here in order to remove that from the group, right? Notice how it's been removed from my 3D model. Well, now I can click back out of here, and this is where that Shift H is really valuable because I can see that I'm now out of the group. I can paste it, but I don't want to do a Control V because then I'm gonna have to place all of this manually. And depending on the insertion point it gives you, it might not be super good, right? You might have to then place it and then replace it and all of that. What I wanna do instead is I wanna use this trick called Edit Paste in Place. What paste in place will do is wherever you cut that from or copied it from, pasting it will just paste it in the exact same position that you were in before. So again, if I was to do this a little more quickly, right? I'm going to select these. I'm going to do a Control X. I'm going to click out of the group and I'm going to do an Edit paste in place. That's going to place those floors in the overall model instead of inside of my walls group right here, so that I can then edit it and work with it. And from there, I would probably close this in and actually, and I would group my floor so that I don't have to worry about my floor merging with the rest of my model. Okay, so sometimes when you get geometry like this, it's been brought in from another modeling program or something like that when it got brought into the 3D warehouse. So you've got these like nasty, jagged edges on here. Now, the reason for that, and I'm going to double click into this a little bit further, the reason for that is because some of this is like triangulated geometry in here that is actually working as supporting geometry for this chair. And so what that means is you can't come in here and replace it because you're going to start getting, or erase it because you're going to start getting gaps in your chair. And so what we want to do with geometry like this is we want to soften it. And so you could come in here and select this edge, toggle it to soft right here. And notice how when you soften these edges, they still exist in the SketchUp model, right? You can see them if you do a view hidden geometry. You can see them if you toggle on the hidden geometry, but it doesn't show up like this. And you can use the erase tool and hold the shift key in order to soften geometry fairly quickly. However, this would still take me a long time to get all of the geometry, right? Well, there's a window over on the right-hand side of the page called Soften Smooth. It's going to be in your tray. If you are a PC user, it'll be a separate window if you're a Mac user. But if I click in here, and if you don't see it, you can go to Window, Default Tray, and toggle on the Soften Edges. But what I can do is I can click into this group and start picking up pieces like this, and notice how there's an option to check the box for soften coplanar. That's going to pick up most of those edges and soften them really quickly. But there's also a slider in here that you can use in order to set the angle of the geometry in here that's softened like this. So you can use this in order to soften that geometry really quickly. And then if there's anything that's left over, you can just double click in here, tap the E key, and then hold shift and click and drag across it in order to soften that geometry. But now we've got this much smoother geometry in here like this. All right, and then the last thing that a lot of new users forget to do is they forget to group and tag their geometry. And so what that means that this can make this whole thing very difficult to manage, right? Because when we start going over into layout, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to be able to toggle our windows and our doors on separate from our walls and things like that. So usually the recommendation is when you're creating objects like this, you want to put them in groups based on like objects. And you can use the outliner to do that. So within the outliner, I'm going to pick this wall up right here, and I'm going to rename this to walls right here. That's my walls group. And we want to put that on a tag as well. So we're going to take that tag over here. We're going to add an arch-walls for architecture-walls. I'm going to tag it using this tool right here, and then we can toggle those walls on and off. Well, then we're going to do the same thing with the floor, and we'll do the same thing with the furnishings. We'll call it furnishings. And you could put doors and windows in their own group, or you could do a separate one for the doors and for the windows, just depending on how you wanted to approach this. But again, this would be doors and windows. And so what that does is that gives us the ability to toggle each one of these things on independently. So if your furnishings are really heavy and I need to actually put them on that tag, you can toggle them off to improve performance right here. But by keeping things grouped, organized, and tagged, you can then toggle things on and off in order to work in your space really easily. Okay, so if you want to learn about a more complete workflow for all of this, you should definitely check out the SketchUp Essentials course. I'll link to it on this page. That's going to teach you some more things about how to put all this together and then start creating plans in layout as well. Note that is currently on sale for a couple days as a part of our Valentine's Day sale, which I'll link to on this page. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.